And welcome to What America's Thinking, where we discuss key elections, demographic trends, and public opinion. I'm Julia Manchester.
And I'm Rafael Bernal.
We've been zeroing in on different key states ahead of the midterm elections that are now coming up quickly. And for today's top lines, we're checking in on Florida. But first, we have recent generic ballot numbers to dive into.
A new USA Today Suffolk University poll finds Republicans leading Democrats in the generic ballot. Respondents now support the Republican congressional candidate over the Democratic candidate by 4 points at 49% and 45% respectively. This is a jump from the poll's joint July survey when Democrats led the GOP by 4 points. Here to help us break down what's going on is director of the Emerson poll, Spencer Kimball. Welcome back, Spencer.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Spencer, to start off with, what is going on with the polls right now? I mean, we saw that Democrats appeared to get, maybe some would call it a sugar high over the summer with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS legislation, inflation maybe and gas prices maybe slightly going down, but that seems to completely have been tossed on its head in the final weeks leading up to Election Day.
Yeah, I think that analysis is exactly on point. We came into June and President Biden had very low approval numbers. And then over the summer, we saw the Democrats really build back his approval and their strength in the Democratic or in the congressional ballot test. But then September came and early October, and we've seen those numbers melt. In our poll, it went from a tie to a Republican +5 within about 3.5 weeks. And we'll have to see if the Democrats can stem the tide in these last 2 weeks, or if the Republicans continue with that momentum.
So we got a little bit of a window into how Democrats are looking at this race. Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, had a little hot mic moment, and he basically said he wasn't very comfortable with how things are going in the Georgia Senate race. He said some not so nice things about GOP candidate nominee Herschel Walker. He said things are going better for them in Nevada, and he says the Pennsylvania debate did not hurt John Fetterman too much. What do you think of Schumer's crystal ball here?
Well, he's got a lot of interesting predictions there. I think the Georgia race certainly tightened. I think Walker's performance in the debate was strong enough to keep him in contention. It was interesting to see where Schumer came on it, considering most of the polls still had Warnock leading at this point. The Pennsylvania race, I think it's going to take a couple of days to really see how voters respond to that debate performance by John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz. Both candidates were up there with different styles, and we'll see over the next couple of days as voters digest what they witnessed and hear from the media how they actually, come out of that event. And I do think Nevada has been competitive. But it's important to remember that's been a 2-point state for a couple of years now, and that Hispanic vote is about 20% of the voting population, and we'll have to see if they swing like some people are predicting.
Yeah, so going back to Pennsylvania, Spencer, I was in across the state earlier this week and talking to voters about that debate. It seems like voters almost already had their minds decided, but they said, look, if they were leaning towards the left but still undecided, the debate made them go towards Fetterman, opposite side with Oz, of course. With this debate taking place on October 25th, and with many of these debates oftentimes being paid most attention to by the political and media class, how much of an impact could this debate have with early voting already taking place and so many voters already entrenched?
Yes, and so this was a very late debate in the cycle. And what we have is what's called selective perception, the way we're going to perceive events. If I'm an Eagles fan versus a Steelers fan and we're playing each other, we're going to walk away from the same event with a different perception of what just transpired. And we see that in debate. So you're going to get that partisan, politicized divide. Where I'm interested in is that 5 to 7% of the electorate that's still undecided. And where are they going to shift over these next 10 days or so? And that's what we're going to be looking at in a pretty competitive race.
So let's keep bouncing all over the country since you're letting us do that. Going back to Nevada, I noticed over the last 12 years, the Emerson poll has gotten it better, has it gotten it closer to the ultimate result than all the other pollsters. Do you have a different? Are you seeing that difference in polling? Are you seeing Emerson sort of looking at Democrats a little bit more favorably again this year as it has in previous years?
Well, yes, in the past, we've generally had it tighter for the Democrats, and most of the polling's had them up closer to 7, 8 points in the state, that we've had it closer to 2 to 3 points. But we're looking at a potential Republican wave year, and it'll be interesting to see not only in the Senate and governor races, but what Nevada did this year is they kind of made the first district a little less Democrat and made the third and fourth district a little bit more Democratic in the redistricting process. But right now, we have very competitive races in all of those congressional districts. So while we're looking at the Senate race and the control of the Senate and obviously the governorship, there's also these congressional races that are at play. And Nevada could be, a real important place to look, as 3 or 4 of those seats could switch.
What about Ohio? This is a race that has been lean red for quite some time, but Tim Ryan arguably has run a very, very good campaign. And we're seeing that the race has gotten very personal. I think we talked last week about the attacks being flung at between Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance on during the 2 past debates. Do you think this is this state could be put at the same level as a Nevada or a Pennsylvania? Or is this going to be something that J.D. Vance is going to win probably with a margin of 3 to 5 points?
Yeah, so I would be in the latter camp there, thinking that J.D. Vance will lead by that amount. Now, our polling has had Vance up, but it was tightening in that time where the Democrats were doing well in mid-September. But we still had him up, I think, by about a point or so. What I expect is there you have a very strong Republican governor, Mike DeWine, against a fairly weak Democratic opponent in Nan Whaley, at least weak in the sense of fundraising and money being spent. And so I think the Republican DeWine will win by double digits, and that might be an opportunity to pull Vance over, which he is struggling in a state that Trump won by 8 points if he only wins by 3 or 4. But of course, in politics, you only have to win by a vote.
Right. So going back to that whiplash that we're seeing all over the country, Republicans leading, then Democrats leading, then Republicans getting the momentum. Do you see, we haven't really seen a big change in economic indicators. Inflation has remained high but stable. There haven't been any big changes in the war in Ukraine or, any big policy changes. Is it just a matter of Republicans campaigning better, spending more money, or do you see that movement coming from somewhere more organic?
Yeah, I think the movement really comes from the gas prices. And I think the good news for President Biden is that this week the gas prices actually went down 5 to 7 cents. And so if they go in that direction, I think the Democrats could do a little bit better than expectations come November 8th. But if those prices continue, if they go in the other direction, which a lot of people were speculating a couple of weeks ago, which is what I thought kind of piled on the Democrats, then we're going to see maybe a run to the right, because those gas prices are what impacts consumers directly on a daily basis. And what we saw in the spring is that that's what brought down the Democrats. And over the summer, when those prices were coming down, the Democrats were coming back up. So we'll have to keep an eye on those gas prices over the next 10 days.
Yeah, and I know that gas prices are very interconnected with the prices of, goods in general, whether it's food and such. But in Pennsylvania this week, I was noticing that talking to voters, the first thing they often brought up was the price of food. And then yesterday, J.D. Vance's campaign released an ad about the price of breakfast, which may seem trivial on its head, but seems actually to connect with a lot of what voters are concerned about. So do you think we're going to hear more about not only the rising price of gas, but the price of food? It seems like going back to 2021 with Glenn Youngkin talking about slashing the grocery tax, this seems to be a very successful message for Republicans.
Yes, and what's interesting on this grocery tax, it's a big issue in Oklahoma. It's a big issue in South Dakota. They're talking about it in Florida. So yes, there's gas tax holidays happening around the country, like in Connecticut and in Georgia, that are helping the incumbent governors. But there's also going to be these grocery tax holidays or repeals, in which case they will help those candidates. Kristi Noem is kind of in a tough position in South Dakota because she was against the tax and now is for it. So it'll be interesting to see if the Democrats are able to take advantage out there on the issue. But those pocketbook issues, that grocery store tax is a percolating issue around the country.
So since we are doing a tour of the country, we can't do that without going to Florida. You mentioned Nevada Hispanics. There's a little bit of a question mark on where they're going to go, but there's a really big question mark, or maybe that's been answered, for Hispanics in Florida. It seems like Governor DeSantis is pulling a lot of Hispanics toward the GOP in Florida, famously pretty good at campaigning with Hispanics, with its very particular crowd of Hispanics. What are you seeing in that state for Hispanic voters this year?
Well, it's important in Florida to remember that the Hispanic vote is not monolithic. And if we come up into the Orlando area of Florida, you're looking at more Puerto Rican Hispanics as opposed to South Florida, where you might have more of the Cuban, Venezuelan Hispanic versus like the Mexican Hispanics that are in Texas or Colorado. So these different pockets of Hispanic populations vote differently. The Republicans seem to have found a niche within the Hispanic community of Florida. And that's what we saw in the elections in 2020 when Trump was able to take the state by 3.5 points. The question here is how the Democrats are going to be able to win back that vote that Clinton was able to carry so successfully in 2016, albeit in a losing effort. She still carried it by over 20 points. So this is a real concern for Democrats in Florida. Right now, it looks like DeSantis has got about a double-digit lead over Charlie Crist. And even Val Demings, who I thought had a very strong debate performance against Senator Rubio, is still trailing by 5 or 6 points. And without that Hispanic vote to put them over the top, I'm not sure what the pathway would be for the Democrats in Florida at this time.
Well, Spencer, thank you so much for being with us again. It's always great to have you.
Oh, thanks again for having me. Have a good day.
Well, we'll be right back to take a deep dive into Florida politics. Stay tuned.